estos perros de raza pequeña
Oli.
Hola, Mili, ¿qué tal?
No hay nadie más.
No, nadie. La docente siempre llega un poco tarde, creo.
No
A
tan
ver,
tarde.
no, no tan tarde, ¿no? A las 8:03 ya sabes estar.
Qué raro.
Entonces se va a conectar.
Ok.
Incluso ya está grabando la clase, qué raro.
Ok.
Hey there, guys. Good evening, everyone.
Hi, teacher, good evening.
Hello, teacher.
Okay, well, please remember that you need to turn your cameras on. Make sure that your cameras are on. Okay, guys, so today we'll continue with the speaking section, and it's actually our last class to look at it. So next class we'll be looking at the writing. Now remember that we have seen that in the speaking section you get 4 tests, one of which is an independent question. It's about your opinion on a certain topic, and then the rest of them are integrated, which means that you need to do something before you answer the question. Now remember that in task 2, it was about a campus announcement. It was something that was happening inside campus. You listen to a conversation, read an announcement. Then question 3 was the last one that we saw, and it was an academic question. You had an article, a topic, its definition, and then a lecture, right? And finally, today we'll be looking at the last one, which is task 4, which is, by the way, quite similar to task 3. You'll see why. So let's start. Okay. So this is it, task 4. Now, in this question, as I was saying, it's quite similar to the previous one. Now, the only difference is that you're not going to have to read anything anymore. Everything is going to be based on the listening part. So you guys will be asked to listen a lecture on an academic topic. And then you will get the question, which is going to ask you to summarize everything, to explain the concept using the examples that were given to you. And the timing is exactly the same as for all of the integrated tasks. You get 30 seconds to prepare and 60 seconds or 1 minute to speak. Okay, so again, you listen to a lecture, an academic lecture, you get the question, 30 seconds to prepare, and 1 minute to speak. So, this okay? Any questions so far? All right.
Excuse me, teacher. So in this part, we won't have a lecture and articles that we have to read, and just it will be someone reading a lecture, someone speaking the lecture.
Exactly. So you don't have to read anything here. You will just listen to the lecture. Remember that a lecture is like a class, right? Like a college class. So that's it. You listen to the lecture, you get the question, and you guys.
Okay, thank you, teacher.
Any other question? Okay. Now, the topics that you're going to find are exactly the same we had for the previous task. So if you remember, we had psychology, biology, and business being the most common ones. And of course, there's a minimum chance that you will have something different, like we said, art, history, literature, what have you. But chances are that in the actual test, you will have psychology, biology, or business. Of course, when you're practicing in some other website outside the ETS, you may find some, different types of topics. But in the real test, it's usually going to be psychology, biology, or business. Right? Remember that psychology was about our mind, memory, how we process certain things, biology, animals and plants, and business, usually advertising, marketing strategies. Yeah. So is that okay? Does it make sense before we move on? All right, so the only thing that's gonna actually change, that's gonna be different, and the most important part to see is the structure, how the lecture is gonna be organized. Because you need to make sure that you identify certain elements that you need to mention in your response, and you need to use the same structure in your response. So we're gonna see how this works. Now, at the beginning of the lecture, you may have a short introduction. It's gonna last 30 to maybe 50 seconds. Sometimes it's actually quite long, but it is an introduction. So the professor will start the class with something like, hey, today we'll be looking at this topic, and maybe give some example, define it, maybe explain it a bit, and that's going to be the introduction. So let's say that maybe the topic is something like, I don't know, solar energy. Right? So maybe the professor's talking about solar energy. You can have a short definition of what that means, an explanation, maybe an example of when you see solar energy, but that's just going to be part of the introduction. You realize, because it's not going to be specific yet, it's just going to be about the topic in general. So to be honest with you, I don't think that's that important. The only thing I would worry about when you're listening to the intro is just try to catch the topic, okay? So what the topic is in general, an overview of the topic or what the topic will be. Now, After that, the professor is going to break down this topic into 2 subtopics. Always 2. No matter what it is, you always have 2 of them. So it may be different things. It could be maybe 2 types of solar energy or 2 types of technology used with solar energy, or maybe 2 definitions of this concept, maybe 2 advantages of solar energy or an advantage and a disadvantage. I don't know what it's going to be, but you will always have 2 of them, okay? Maybe 2 types or whatever. So those are going to be the subtopics from now on, right? Subtopic 1 will be the first division and subtopic 2 the second one. So let's say, I don't know, you have 2 benefits. Maybe you have one that it's eco-friendly and second that it's cheaper, maybe. I don't know. So that's it. You will have 2 subtopics. Now, usually in this case, I'm just making this up, but most of the time you will have some very specific terms here. So I don't know if you remember, but what you had in question 3 in the title, something like system thinking or groupthink or perceptual constancy. So you will have something like that. It's very likely that you have a very specific term in the subtopics. So you really need to pay attention to them and try to take notes, because you do need to mention what those are. That's really important. And then you're going to have a short definition of that term. So what does it mean that this is eco-friendly? So what is that concept definition? All right, so you're going to have a definition for each part. Okay, probably the example is not so compelling right now. Maybe we could say something like pollution, right? Maybe pollution and 2 types of pollution. And you have maybe air contamination and water pollution. Okay, and then you have a short definition. And then you will have 2 examples illustrating each of the subtopics. So if you have air contamination, maybe you have the name of some, I don't know, some gases that pollute the environment, or some particles, or I don't know. If you have water pollution, you have the example of a lake or the name of a river, something like that, something a bit more detailed. All right, but you will always have that. A short introduction where you have the main topic presented, probably an explanation, and then the 2 subtopics and 2 examples. Right? The most important part, if you ask me, is always going to be the 2 subtopics and the 2 examples. So you really want to direct your attention there. Maybe. Okay. So any questions about this? This okay? Do you guys have any questions? All right, now I'm going to give you a tip. The first one I'll give is make sure that you always read the question. Okay, so sometimes we tend to, after we listen to the lecture, be so focused on our notes and trying to put everything together, trying to think of the response, that we miss the question. So try not to do that. Make sure that you read the question, you reread it, you listen to it because it's going to be spoken as well. And this is because in the question, you may have a really good summary of whatever you had in the intro. So the question is probably going to tell you what the topic is. And sometimes they even tell you what the subtopics are or the examples. So you really don't want to miss that. It's something that you can actually use in your response, because it can be hard to summarize the whole introduction sometimes, or understand what the topic is, or, express it in the appropriate words. So make sure that you read the question and you can use that in your response. It's no problem. Okay. Some more tips I can give, just make sure that you use reporting verbs in the simple present, like points out, claims, mentions, describes, explains, that kind of thing, in the simple present as they are facts. And third person, of course, because you're talking about the lecturer or the professor. And yeah. And also because you're kind of citing, you're not really saying this yourself. You're just reporting what the professor has said. Now remember that the lectures usually have a structure that's quite similar to written paragraphs, like a written article. So you want to pay attention for any transitions that you hear. Like if you hear on the other hand, it's probably going to be the second subtopic. If you hear to illustrate, it's going to be the example. So pay attention to them. Next thing, you have limited time. So you need to summarize a 3-minute lecture and do it in 1 minute. So of course, you guys are going to have to leave some things behind. You cannot cover everything and mention every single important detail, which is why it's important for you to use your own words, try to have it as simple, as concise, as summarized as possible. You need to think that you were explaining this to a 13-year-old kid. Okay, so it needs to actually be understandable, even if the lecture isn't that understandable. Okay, and I'm not saying that you need to leave behind some important stuff, but try to, prioritize what you think is important, and also summarize it as much as you can. If you have some details, you can include 1 or 2 of them. You don't need to mention everything, just what you consider is most important, which is always going to be the subtopics and the examples, right? Don't try to speak so fast, even if you have little time. When we try to hurry, we tend to make more mistakes, more grammar mistakes, which is not ideal. And try to speak with enthusiasm as well. Like you actually were passionate about this topic, you liked it. And as I was saying, like you're trying to explain to a 13-year-old kid. So any questions now about this? Any comments or anything? Okay. So in that case, we're going to do our first example. And I'll play the lecture for you guys. You need to take some notes. Remember, try to organize your notes in this way. You're looking for what the topic is, the 2 subtopics, and the 2 examples. And in the same order. So I'm going to play the lecture. And it's going to be a business lecture. So let's see. Okay.
60 seconds to speak. Listen to part of a lecture in a business class.
People who are likely to buy a company's product are called target customers. And these target customers influence a company's marketing strategy. In order to develop a marketing strategy, a company will look at certain characteristics of the target customers to decide when and where to advertise, so that they'll reach the target customers most effectively. I'd like to talk to you today about 2 kinds of target customers that can influence marketing strategy, specifically age and geographic location of the target customers. Say a company makes, who are its target customers? Kids, right? So if the company wants to make sure its television advertising reaches its target customers, it'd want to advertise during times when kids are actually watching television, like during children's television shows. That way, it can make sure that kids see the advertisements. And that way, the company would get people in that age group to go buy toy cars, or to ask their parents to buy them at least. Now, another important characteristic to consider is geographic location, places where the company's target customers live. Think about a company that makes boats. Its target customers are people who own homes near oceans or lakes, places where they can use boats. After all, people who don't live near water don't have much use for boats. So by placing advertisements on signs along the road or on television in cities and towns that are near oceans or lakes, the company would be more likely to reach the target customers for its boats and sell more of them as a result.
Using points and examples from the lecture, Explain how the characteristics of target customers influence marketing strategy for products.
Right? All right, so before looking at the question, let's try to discuss what it was about. So the first thing, for starters, who can tell me what the topic was? Where was the lecture about? Yes, Ale?
Yes, teacher. I couldn't hear well the recording because it was so coded. I don't know if it's by my internet, but the topic was about target customers, I think.
Okay, target customers. Maybe I could play it again for you guys if it was my.
Yes, I couldn't hear well, but it was just the first part on just before the second example.
Okay, I'm gonna play it again.
To speak. Listen to part of a lecture in a business class.
People who are likely to buy a company's product are called target customers. And these target customers influence a company's marketing strategy. In order to develop a marketing strategy, a company will look at certain characteristics of the target customers to decide when and where to advertise, so that they'll reach the target customers most effectively. I'd like to talk to you today about two characteristics of target customers that can influence marketing strategy, specifically age and geographic location of the target customers. Say a company makes toy cars. Who are its target customers? Kids, right? So if the company wants to make sure its television advertising reaches its target customers, it'd want to advertise during times when kids are actually watching television, like during children's television shows. That way, it can make sure that kids see the advertisements. And that way, the company would get people in that age group to go buy toy cars, or to ask their parents to buy them at least. Now, another important characteristic to consider is geographic location, places where the company's target customers live. Think about a company that makes boats. Its target customers are people who own homes near oceans or lakes, places where they can use boats. After all, people who don't live near water don't have much use for boats. So by placing advertisements on signs along the road or on television in cities and towns that are near oceans or lakes, the company would be more likely to reach the target customers for its boats and sell more of them as a result.
Using points and examples from the lecture, explain how the characteristics of target customers influence marketing strategy for products.
Right. So again, what were you saying about the topic? What was?
Yes, teacher.
Okay, so you were saying, Ale?
And this time I could hear very well.
Okay, that's fine. So, but what about the topic though? What was the lecture about?
Topic was talking about target customers and how it's influenced or on marketing strategies.
Okay, that's perfect. Target customers and how it influences marketing strategy. So that's really cool. And I think that's also in the question, isn't it? So how the characteristics of target customers influence marketing strategy for products. Now, if we want to be a bit more specific, we can also say it's about two characteristics of target customers, right? It's always two. So we could also say that. So, okay, maybe I will add that word. So two characteristics of target customers and how it influences. All right. Now, what about the first subtopic, the first characteristic? What was it? Anybody remembers?
It was the age.
Age, perfect. So I think this doesn't need that much explaining, it's just age, the age group of the target customers. And what is the example that the professor gives about that? How does the professor illustrate this characteristic?
He illustrates the example of toys, of cars toys, sorry, and how they could present this product to the children. They have to show the advertisement why is the children's times on TV.
Okay. Okay, perfect. So yes, if they want to advertise car toys that are designed for children, and they're gonna focus on the age group of their target customers, and they're gonna show the advertising, the TV commercials when kids are watching TV. Okay, nice. All right, what about the second subtopic? What was the second characteristic that we are looking at?
Geographic locations.
Geographic location, perfect. So, geographic location. Anything else you would like to say? So
She puts the example of boats about people who live near lakes or the ocean.
okay. So what do they do? How do they advertise boats?
She says that advertising about boats is put in television shows in geographic location near lakes and oceans.
Okay, all right, so yes, although I'm not so sure if it was TV commercial. I think it was like signals or billboards in the streets or on the roads. Okay, but that's great. So yeah, you advertise boats in places where people live near lakes or water. Okay, guys. So anything else anybody would like to add to this outline? Anything you may have maybe in your notes or something? Okay, and that's great because I think that's all you need. So any questions now? Okay, so here's what you need to do in your response, which is basically organize it in the same way that we just did the outline. So at the beginning, you need a short introduction. And when I say short, I really mean it. So it needs to be like 15 seconds at most. And in the intro, you need to summarize the whole introduction that you had, which is just telling what the topic is, okay, what we just wrote down here. So the lecture, or in the lecture, the professor discusses, and then you can say something like, the professor discusses 2 characteristics of target customers and how that influences marketing strategies. And that's it. So try to use that 2, okay, so that you're acknowledging that there are 2 of them. So 2 characteristics of this, or 2 types of solar energy, or 2 definitions of money, or 2 types of attention, or I don't know, 2 ways in which you could do this or that. So that way it's gonna be easier. And remember that you can always use what you have in the question. So 2 characteristics of target customers and their influence marketing strategy. All right, that's the introduction. Even if you have something longer in the lecture's introduction, you need to summarize it. So for example, here in our lecture, we had a pretty long thing, right? People who are likely to buy a company's product are called target customers, and they influence the company's marketing strategy. So you have many things here, but you don't need to mention all of them, just what the topic is, okay? So topic, and that's it. And that's your intro. And after you're done with that, you need to move on to mentioning the 2 subtopics that you have. Since you have 2 of them, make sure that you use transitions. So for starters, to start, first of all, to begin with, the professor describes, I'm using a reporting verb as well, not just saying says. So the professor describes, and here you mentioned the first one, right? Age, which is targeting a product to a very specific age group. Now, for instance, and here you summarize the example. For instance, if a company wants to advertise car toys that are made for children, they are likely to show the TV commercials at a time where kids are watching TV. That's the example. And then you move on to the next one. So a transition, furthermore, moreover, besides, also, he explains, and then you talk about the second one, geographic location. That is another target, it's another characteristic of target customers, right? So to illustrate, he mentions that if a company would like to advertise boats for people who are boats, they are likely to do it or to place ads or to place maybe billboards in places or towns near water or near lakes or near the ocean, so that people who live there can see the ads. Okay, so that's it. You have the intro where you have the topic, you have the first subtopic, the example, second subtopic, and example. So you don't need a conclusion. It's usually not going to give you so much time to have one. But if you do have time, you can say something like, thus, those are the two, and you repeat. Those are the two characteristics that, that I don't know, businesses or that companies take into consideration when advertising something. Okay? Or the two major characteristics or the two main characteristics. Okay, guys, so is this all right? Any questions about the template now? Or the response?
I got a question, teacher. My question is that in the part that we said to start, the professor describes, we just describe what he talked about, like the characteristic, the first characteristic that was age, and that's all, or we have to explain what he mentioned about age, or just said the professor describes age, for instance, and we directly explain the example.
Okay, gotcha. That's a great question. So the reason why this which is that sometimes you have something a bit more like a harder term, you know? So age in this case doesn't need that much explanation. You don't have to explain what age is, but sometimes you have like a very specific term. So sometimes maybe you have like reliability, and then you have a definition. So if you consider it's important, it's something that needs explaining, then try to do it. If you have a definition, then try to use it. So reliability, which is, I don't know, how trustable a product is. Okay, so in that case, you can explain. In this case, I would say it's not that necessary. Maybe you can say something like, which is advertising to a specific age group of consumers, maybe, but it's not that relevant, you know? So it depends. If you think it's a very specific term, not that easy to understand, then you can explain it. If you don't, if it's like something like age, then you can just move on to the example. Okay?
Okay, thank you.
Okay, guys. Any other question? Okay. So then in that case, we're gonna practice. You guys are gonna do so. So, all right, before we do that though, is there anyone who would like to try this one here that we just did? You just need to try to remember and put everything together so that we can see how it will look with the timer and everything. So will anybody want to give it a try? Anyone?
Me, teacher.
Okay, nice, Camila, thank you. So go ahead.
Okay, so the lecture discusses about two characteristics about target customers. First of all, the professor describes age, which is advertisement for a specific age. For instance, he said that it's important to play advertisement during kids' TV shows. So kids could say to their parents to buy the Cars toys. Furthermore, he talked about geographic location, which is places where target customer lives. To illustrate that, he said that people who own homes near oceans or lake will be more likely to buy those kinds of products, and they have to put some advertisement on the streets.
Okay, that was perfect. Well done. So loved how you managed your time. Your intro was short. Both of them were separated. You had time to explain what they are about and the example. So no comment. Maybe some things, tiny details I would say. At the beginning, remember that the verb discusses or discuss doesn't need a preposition, right? So the lecture discusses target customers, not about. Discusses about? No, just discusses, okay? Discusses target customer. And careful with your reporting verbs. I would try to, first thing, use them in the simple present. So instead of he said, try to say he says. But even then, try to use other ones instead of says. So he claims, states, mentions, explains. All right.
Okay, teacher, thank you.
Okay, Cami, thank you so much. That was great. All right then, guys. Any questions now before we practice? Okay. So first, let's do a psychology topic, and then we do a biology. So hold on.
Now listen to part of a talk in an education class.
One of the hardest parts of teaching is keeping your students' attention. Now, the key to doing this is understanding the concept of attention. Basically, there are two types of attention. The first type is active. Active attention is voluntary. It's when you intentionally make yourself focus on something. And since it requires effort, it's hard to keep up for a long time. Okay, so let's say you're teaching a biology class, and today's topic is frogs. All right, you're standing at the front of the room and lecturing. A frog is a type of animal known as an amphibian. Well, this isn't necessarily going to keep the students' interest, but most of them will force themselves to pay active attention to your lecture. But it's only a matter of time before they get distracted. Now, the other type of attention is passive attention, when it's involuntary. Passive attention requires no effort because it happens naturally. If something's really interesting, students don't have to force themselves to pay attention to it. They do it without even thinking about it. So, back to our biology lecture. You start talking about frogs, and then you pull a live frog out of your briefcase. You're describing it while you hold it up. Show the students how long its legs are and how they're used for jumping, for example. Then maybe you even let the frog jump around a bit on the desk or the floor. In this case, by doing something unexpected, something more engaging, you can tap into their passive attention, and it can last much longer than active attention. As long as the frog's still there, your students will be interested.
Using points and examples for talk, explain the difference between active and passive attention.
So now you'll have 30 seconds to prepare your responses.
Teacher, could you repeat the last part of the question? I couldn't hear well.
Just the question?
My internet is very slow now. Yes, the last part I couldn't hear.
The last part or the question?
And last part and the question.
Okay.
That's 30 seconds or 20 seconds, I think.
Okay, no.
About it. So back to our biology lecture. You start talking about frogs, and then you pull a live frog out of your briefcase. You're describing it while you hold it up. Show the students how long its legs are and how they're used for jumping, for example. Then maybe you even let the frog jump around a bit on the desk or the floor. In this case, by doing something unexpected, something more engaging, you can tap into their passive attention, and it can last much longer than active attention. As long as the frog's still there, your students will be interested.
Using points and examples from the talk, explain the difference between active and passive attention.
Oh, 30 more seconds. Okay, guys. So who wants to try? Maybe Roger?
Okay, teacher.
Okay, go.
Okay, the listening is about the types of attention. To begin with, the woman talks about the active attention, which is voluntary and is hard to keep up for a long time. One example was about the frog, because they are amphibian and those things, but it is not a good idea to have a good attention. That is why she talks about passive attention, which is involuntary and requires no effort, and you get it without thinking about it because you mention something unexpected, and that is the best way to have a good attention for students in classes.
Okay, nice. So your intro was perfect, less than 10 seconds. I used transitions, maybe to refer to the professor, try to say professor instead of woman. And your definitions were awesome. They were clear, concise, summarized. Maybe about your examples, you do need some context. So what you guys can do in case the same example is, used for the two subtopics, you can kind of mention it at the beginning. So the lecture discusses two types of attention and illustrates them, providing the example of a biology class in which the teacher is explaining about frogs. So then in the example, you don't need to give the context anymore. So you just say active attention, which is voluntarily, I think. So for instance, the teacher is defining what a frog is and blah, blah, blah. And then to illustrate, she mentions that if she pulls out a live frog in front of the class, that's gonna catch everyone's interest and they are gonna be involuntarily paying attention, right? So you were missing the second example too. Careful there. that's something that you guys can do to save time, maybe. Okay. Do you know what I mean? Is that okay? Does it make sense? All right, then, guys. So anybody else wants to try this one? Yes, Eloy?
Yes.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay. And the lecture is about attention related with teaching. And the professor mentioned two types of attention. The first type is called active attention. This is voluntary. And this is hard to keep up to students to keep up for a long time. To illustrate this, the professor talks about class about frogs in a biology class. And if for example, if you talk about frogs and just describe it, you are forcing the students to keep attention. The second type is called passive attention. This type is involuntary and don't require effort to students. For example, if you are talking about frogs in a class and you put a living frog in this class, this unexpected event engage the students, and this attract the attention and not require effort to put attention in this.
Okay, well done. That's amazing. So no comments, just careful with time. Make sure you look at the clock and that you summarize it as much as you can. Sometimes you have different definitions, right? So active attention is something that you do voluntarily. It requires no effort, or I think it's the opposite, right? It requires effort. It's hard to keep up. Maybe you can, if you have many, you can mention two or one in case, just to try to save some time. And don't forget your transitions, right? The second one is also, or I don't know, besides, the second one is that. Okay. So Ale, I saw that you raised your hand. You want to try this one or the next one?
Could be the same. I would try the next one.
Next one? Okay. So, all right then. Any questions so far? That was a psychology lecture. Now let's do a biology one. It might be a bit harder for some people. Let's see. It has more detail. Let's see. See how it goes.
Seconds to speak. Now listen to part of a lecture in a biology class.
Now, many sea animals, in order to hide from predators, have, over time, developed different kinds of camouflage to help them blend in with their environment and avoid detection by predators. Picture the surface of the seafloor. It's as varied as the land we live on. It's got peaks and valleys, vegetation, rocky areas, and some sea animals have developed permanent colors or shapes to resemble these environmental features. This camouflage helps disguise them from predators by enabling them to blend into a specific part of the sea. For instance, take a kind of fish like the leafy sea dragon. Well, the name says it all. It resembles a small green dragon with leaf-like protrusions sticking out like arms. And because of its current shape, it blends in extremely well with green sea plants. So when the leafy sea dragon is swimming through the plant, predators have trouble seeing it. But when it enters other environments without
Sorry, guys, I don't know what happened. I'm gonna play the audio in the entire thing because that's where we left off.
Teacher, I can hear you well.
Okay, I'm so sorry. I'm gonna try to fix it. Hold on. Okay, guys, can you hear me better now?
Yes, teacher.
Yes,
Okay,
teacher.
I'm gonna play it again.
Seconds to speak. Now listen to part of a lecture in a biology class. Now many sea animals, in order to hide from predators, have, over time, developed different kinds of camouflage to help them blend in with their environment and avoid detection by predators. Picture the surface of the seafloor. It's as varied as the land we live on. It's got peaks and valleys, vegetation, rocky areas, and some sea animals have developed permanent colors or shapes to resemble these environmental features. This camouflage helps disguise them from predators by enabling them to blend into a specific part of the sea. For instance, take a kind of fish like the leafy sea dragon. Well, the name says it all. It resembles a small green dragon with leaf-like protrusions sticking out like arms. Now, because of its color and shape, it blends in extremely well with green sea plants. So when the leafy sea dragon is swimming through these plants, predators have trouble seeing it. But when it enters other environments without these green plants, its camouflage doesn't work anymore. Now, other sea animals are difficult to spot anywhere in the sea because their type of camouflage enables them to change color. Take the cuttlefish, a fish that's closely related to the squid and octopus. Unlike leafy sea dragons, cuttlefish have not developed any particular shape to hide from predators, but they have a lot more mobility because their camouflage allows them to blend into any environment. Because cuttlefish have shifting pigments that allow them to change color in a matter of seconds, and so they can almost instantaneously match the color of their surroundings. If they're swimming by green sea plants, they'll turn green. And if they're swimming over the brown seafloor, they'll turn brown. Using the examples of the leafy sea dragon and the cuttlefish, describe two kinds of camouflage and the benefits they provide.
Okay, guys. So now 30 seconds to prepare your responses. So, Ale, you want to go?
Okay, teacher, I will try.
All right, and then me link. So go ahead, Ale.
Okay. The lecture discusses kinds of camouflage skills for fishes to avoid sea animals or predators and on the sea. First, the professor describes that fishes use seafloor to avoid the predators, and the first kind of camouflage is for a specific part of the sea. For example, a dragonfish that use shining colors to avoid or to get protect in some part of the sea. But another kind of fishes, for example, an octopus, use a camouflage and don't have a regular shape, and also can blend any environment and not a specific part of the sea. Yes, I just can say that.
Okay, nice. What I like is that you were able to identify the two subtopics, which is actually something that people sometimes get mixed up about. So they talk about the animals, but not the subtopics. But you did talk about both of them. You said the first one is the type of camouflage where I think you just resemble some specific feature of the environment, like the leafy dragon. And the second one where you can change to any color, any shape you want, or well, animals can. So, and then you mentioned the examples too. Don't forget to add a transition instead of but, however, on the other hand. And I think that the reason why you didn't have time is because your intro was too long. Just try to use what you have in the question. Doesn't need to be that long. So the lecture is about, or the lecture describes two kinds of camouflage that sea animals use to, I don't know, avoid being caught or to avoid predators. Okay? Summarize the intro.
Okay, teacher.
Okay, guys. So now Milenka, I can go with you.
Okay, teacher.
Okay, go now.
The lecture discusses about the camouflage that some animals have to get defense from the predator. The professor described the first example, that is the LFC dragon or green dragon that can change their shapes to enabling the predators. He also mentions how they can change their shapes on the sea. On the other hand, the professor explains the cuttlefish. They can't change their shapes, but they can shape their colors, so they can camouflage into the ocean. And that are the two reasons that he mentions to explain the camouflage from the animals.
Hey, well done. Remember at the conclusion, these are not reasons, right? These are just two subtopics. So those are the two types of camouflage, right?
Yes.
And remember, identify the subtopics. They are never going to be the animals. When you have biology, you have two animals, but they're not the subtopics. They're just the examples. So using the examples of the leafy dragon and the cuttlefish, describe the two kinds of camouflage. Those are the subtopics. The first camouflage, which was, I think, resembling one specific feature of the ocean. And the second one, which is changing colors and shapes. Okay. And then,
yes.
All right, guys.
Okay.
So, what do you think? Do you have some questions, comments? Where we go? No? Okay.
Teacher, I have a question.
Yes, Anya?
Yes. Is it really necessary to make a conclusion after the examples or not?
No, not really. You don't have to do a conclusion. Actually, I wouldn't say you have time to do it. So don't worry about it. Only if you have extra time, you can do one.
Okay, teacher.
Any other question? All right. So please don't forget to fill out the daily survey and see you all next class on Thursday.
Bye, teacher.
Thank you, teacher. Bye.
Bye, teacher.
Thank you, teacher.
Night,
Goodbye.
teacher.
Bye,
Bye.
guys.
Bye, teacher.
Goodbye.